Hello, all. Wanted to talk a little bit about Tolkien and economics and what we can glean from both his personal and public life as to his views on economic theory, practice, and maybe even how he would assess a lot of the West's current economic systems. So, starting with Tolkien's background, he was obviously very open about how pivotal his Catholicism was to how he viewed things. It's also worth noting that growing up in the English countryside, he had a front row seat to that idealistic, pre industrial, agrarian, traditional English countryside and slowly watched the encroaching factories come, closer and closer to his childhood home and the smog and everything that went along with it, the noise, the light pollution at night, little things like that that would impact his view on economics. He also, it's worth noting, would have lived during a period in which the papal encyclical Rerum Novarum was published by Pope Leo XIII. The encyclical discusses a wide range of issues: condemnation, critique of socialism, of communism, asserting the moral imperative of private property and less government involvement, the better. But it also threw out some moral absolutes as pertaining to what we would loosely call capitalism and was critical of, while not using the word necessarily, usury, so excessive interest charged on loans, um, and at the same time not opening the doors for complete libertarianism either, because allowing the market to determine every aspect of life can be problematic when you're dealing with moral absolutes, the care of widows and orphans and other societal obligations that we all share. So in the spirit of that, Tolkien almost certainly would have been influenced by it. Coupled with his disdain for technology, he described the internal combustion engine as the most evil invention ever created. So, coupling all these things together, one can safely conclude that he had very strong feelings towards finance, economics, industry, and so on. So, taking his Catholicism and transferring that into his writings, what can we glean from his ideals as shown in Lord of the Rings? I think we should start with the antagonists. So Isengard, Saruman, represents unbridled industrialization, reckless destruction of nature. The furnaces are running 24 hours a day, making weaponry and serving as an arsenal. But you can see the same thing with Mordor, right? So you have a massive economy based on slave labor in horrible, hopeless conditions, just producing enough food to feed an endless war machine with the orcs. And to a large extent, it's been observed, and I think justifiably so, that his views on these topics are influenced by what he saw in industrialized England: wage labor, tough working conditions, deterioration of the family, stuff that has arguably, in some respects, continued into our own day. Interest rates, even for something like a loan, credit cards never been higher, so usury is the forefront of everyone's mind in that regard too. But ultimately, he paints a grim picture of what those economies look like. Contrast that with the free peoples of Middle Earth. So Gondor is the biggest country. It did have big cities, so Minas Tirith was a big city. But even before the War of the Ring, Osgiliath was a big city on the river. Minas Morgul, prior to Mordor assimilating it into its realm, Misanun, and would have been, just another large city too. But they were a seafaring folk, so you have ports, trade, traditional economic practices there, as well as a lot of agrarianism. So the Pelennor fields had farms and homesteads on them. That's not really shown in the films, unfortunately, but there was an agricultural component to that economy too. You can look at the Rohirrim, more nomadic because they had horses integrated into their society, but They also had farms. They did set up villages. Again, a more traditional, almost a feudal look to the way that they structured their economy too. So no industrialization, very heavy on livestock, so very agrarian. But the cream of the crop, the the obvious example of Tolkien's ideal economy would be the Shire. And it fits his criteria for several reasons. Yes, it's also agrarian, but it's small scale. It's localized. It incorporates the Catholic principle of subsidiarity, where those closest to a situation, those closest to a scenario, should be those influencing and making decisions about it, rather than the large multinational corporations that we have in the world nowadays that, someone can make a decision that impacts pay and quality of work, quality of life for someone half a planet away, with the stroke of a pen. Something like that in the Shire would never happen, could never happen. Everybody was independent. It was a simple economy based on basic comforts, family, economy, localized political forces, very small police force that really was more ceremonial than anything else. The mayor, again, a more ceremonial title, some leadership involved, but not much. Just a elaborated village of everyone doing their own thing and arguably living in relatively good harmony with one another. That was Tolkien's ideal, and he would have, by his own account, wanted to be a hobbit living in the Shire. And can't say I disagree. This approach was popular at the time with people like Chesterton and Belloc pushing for distributism, which was a similar economic model. It lacked the sophisticated details to actually map it out in contrast with other economic theory, but it was popular and harkened back to that traditional countryside of England. Tolkien never formally identified himself as a distributist in league with Chesterton and Belloc, but they would have had similar views on the economy. So there's that Venn diagram definitely overlaps a significant amount in the middle. But yeah, worth noting Tolkien's economic views, looking at our own economies nowadays, whether it's Canada, the United States, England, Australia, definitely a departure from what his ideal would have been, and arguably, as quote unquote progress marches forward, it moves further away from that ideal. But at least in his writings, we can see what a more maybe holistic economy society looked like to Tolkien, and try our best to incorporate it into our own lives. Peace.